Okay, is everyone ready? Have we got everyone here? Dave is there getting tea. It is 2 minutes past 2, so if I can start, Daniel will be here. Right, so good afternoon everyone. There are no emergency drills planned, but in the event of a fire or other emergency, you should vacate the building in an orderly fashion through the nearest available exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. Please can I ask that the live stream is started and verbal confirmation provided when we're broadcasting.
I can confirm, Chair, that we're now live.
Thank you. Welcome to the meeting of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and also making a recording. The recording will be available via the Council's website shortly after the meeting has concluded. Other attendees are permitted to film, photograph and record our public meeting, providing that it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If you do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please identify yourself so that anyone who intends recording the meeting can be made aware. I don't think anybody here has an objection. Thank you. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, could members speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum and ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Do we have any remote attendees as yet?
We do not, Chair.
All right, thank you. I expect that at some point Helen Wayne will be joining us online. Any members of the committee or co-optees with voting rights who join the meeting remotely are not able to vote on any resolutions of the committee but may otherwise participate in the debate. So we don't have any remote attendees. We have a number of officers and other attendees present, and I will ask them to introduce themselves as we come to the specific item if needed. If you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be really helpful, especially those members of the partnership that we're not that familiar with. Thank you. Have we received any apologies for absence?
Apologies were received by Jan Francis, the co-opted families representative.
Thank you. No other apologies. I would actually like to welcome Councillor Frank Cornthwaite to this committee, who I haven't formally welcomed before. I mean, he is one of our newest members on the committee, so welcome, Councillor Cornthwaite. Have we received details of any members nominated to attend the meeting in place of a member of the committee?
There are no named substitutes.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any declarations of interest in respect to any items on the agenda? None? Thank you. We're moving on to the minutes. To approve and sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of November. Are there any proposed corrections for accuracy? No? So that we can agree that the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of November be agreed as a correct record. Everybody agreed? Yep. Thank you. If I can just ask the monitoring officer, in terms of the recommendations that were made at that meeting, so we had a really good discussion about what child-friendly Herefordshire would look like and how the voice of children could be incorporated into policy in Herefordshire. Do we know where those recommendations have got to?
Thank you, Chair. We're currently waiting a response on those recommendations, and we intend to publish that to the papers for this committee for the March meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions from members of the public. Have we received any written questions from members of the public?
2 questions from members of the public were received. The questions and responses were published as a supplement to the agenda for this meeting on the Herefordshire Council website.
Thank you. And now moving on to supplementary questions, and the questioner is allowed 1 supplementary question. A supplementary question must be a question and not a statement and arise directly out of the original question, and the reply must not take longer than a minute to ask. And I just wish to remind everybody about the rule on supplementary questions, that they must not disclose confidential or exempt information, names of individuals, or provide information where they may be easily identified. For example, individual officers of public bodies making criminal accusations or referring to an issue which is currently the subject of a formal council complaint. I just want to make a very brief statement about public questions. I have looked at this since I've been chair of this committee. And I have spoken to various other councils about this, and lots of children's scrutiny committees do not have public questions. We do have public questions, but there is obviously a risk with public questions that we could expose primarily a child or something incredibly confidential, and particularly through the supplementary question. So in order to protect everybody involved, and particularly the children of Herefordshire, I have asked that we have our supplementary questions written. I've also done this so that we can actually just get on with our effective scrutiny without the anxiety of whether somebody is actually going to not be able to stick to that rule. So with that, bearing that in mind, can I ask if we have had supplementary questions, please?
Yes, we've had 2 written supplementary questions. They've been received. I'll read these out along with the responses to them. The first supplementary question is from Mr. James McGowan. It reads, Council Constitution references statutory co-opted members. You have no churchmen. I won't be recommending a replacement from the diocese until I am satisfied that there is any point. Parent Governor Representative England Regulations 2001 and Constitution require Herefordshire Council to recruit 3. There is but one. 4.57 of the Constitution require teaching sector and families representatives. There is but one. Can you provide reassurance that should this committee continue its 2025 work programme, it wouldn't be operating against the Local Authorities Committee System England Regulations 2012, the Parent Governor Representatives England Regulations 2001 and Herefordshire Council's Constitution? The response provided for this, Section 4.57 of Herefordshire Council's Constitution allows for the appointment of co-opted statutory education representatives to its Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, 1 representative as nominated by the Diocese of Hereford and 1 representative as nominated by the Archdiocese of Cardiff. It also allows for the appointment of 3 parent governors as elected from the school sector. However, although we require these positions to be filled, this is not required for the committee to continue to operate. It may still lawfully meet and carry out its work with vacancies to its membership. Herefordshire Council continues to seek nominations to the co-opted statutory representative positions on the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee.
Thank you. Thank you. And if I can just add that we are, of course, open to any discussion with any organisation in Herefordshire, including the diocese, as how we move forward, and that any member of the public who wishes to promote an item for the work programme is welcome to make contact with us. Do we have another supplementary question?
Yes, we do. Second supplementary question was from Mr. Eddie Parkinson. An internet search shows this council in 2016 placed a child with a sex offender in Bradford. The child told BBC News, "My whole time up there was torture, every day was a struggle, not having my parents there," adding he had suffered physical and verbal abuse while living there, but not sexual. I've met professionals concerned about current failures of duty of care by this council. Children may be being placed into the care of persons deemed such a risk to children that police have made referrals based on legitimate concerns that could lead to prosecution. Will the council undertake a full forensic review of cases past and present to be sure that no children are in placements with registered sex offenders or those flagged by police as a potential danger? The response to that question reads, we are keen to give further assurances in this matter. Therefore, the Director of Children's Services, with support from appropriate service directors, will carry out a review of all current placements to provide additional senior management overview in each case. We will review for each disclosure and barring service and police information pertaining to the individual carers at the time of the suitability assessment, alongside a review of the fostering approval panel minutes. We will review any cases where any new allegations of sexual offences have been made post-placement and will ensure that risk assessment and outcome decisions in relation to each case is appropriate, based on our review on the starting position that no child should be placed with any person convicted of sexual offences against a child. We will cross-reference all police-registered multi-agency public protection arrangements, Level 2 and Level 3 offenders, against our list of registered carers to ensure if any child is placed with any MAPA individual, a risk assessment of suitability has been completed. We will also share communications with all staff on this review to reiterate our position on this matter. We will complete this work by 31st of March 2025.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the members of the public for those questions and the supplementary questions. Have we had any written questions from members of the council?
No questions received from members of the council. Thank
you. And now we get to the main part of the agenda, and what I would like to do is actually just to move the item 8, which is the summary letter following Ofsted's monitoring visit to review the council and its partners, how they protect vulnerable children from extra-familial risk. And I wonder if we can just move this item forward, because a lot of the areas that would have been covered in this would probably fall within the safeguarding children's partnership report. So some of that will be covered by the Ofsted monitoring visit. So if I could ask the Director of Children's Services, please, just to give us an overview of that monitoring visit and the outcomes from Ofsted, and then there may be a few questions about it, particularly just in the areas that Ofsted raised as of some concern. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Tina Russell, the Interim Director of Children's Services here in Herefordshire, and I've got to start with an apology. Complete miscommunication, probably on my part, but I have written an overview report, actually, that I presented to the Cabinet briefing meeting, which I had thought I'd shared in order to be reassigned for this, because it gives an overview of the Ofsted monitoring visit. So I've obviously thought I'd done something and hadn't. So apologies you haven't got this in writing, but that would have given you the response, the service response to the issues that Ofsted raised in the letter. But I will go through that now, but I can provide that written report.
If we can include that written report within the minutes of the meeting, if that's all right.
I think it will be, yes, Chair. Let me check that. But I think
Right. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to say what's in it, so it's
okay.
it's not going to be a controversial thing, and you can just save somebody writing all of the minutes. In terms of my overview report, what I didn't do was kind of recount the letter, because I thought that wouldn't be particularly a helpful approach, and so I've broken my report down into key areas. And the first area, which was subject to the inspection, it was the Get Safe specialist team that we had, that we've got, and that's a multidisciplinary team, and that's really the hub of where the exploitation work starts, and that team work alongside all of the other children's services teams, from front door assessment teams through to children in care, children subject to child protection, and care leavers. So that hub team is our specialist Get Safe team, and as I said, that's a multidisciplinary team. Ofsted found that that team work effectively to reduce risks, that their work is timely and well structured, and that those staff in that team form trusting relationships with children, and that the quality of those relationships serve as a very positive foundation to reduce risks for many children. So that was the overarching finding of that, the hub of that specialist team. And as well as doing direct work with children and families, they also support communication to all of the other professionals as a multi-agency group. So a really, really positive response for a very, very effective team there that as a hub that Ofsted found. The next kind of area that Ofsted looked at was what are we offering around early help, and how are we identifying children who might be at risk of exploitation. And what they found was that there are systems in place that enable the service to undertake prompt screening and prompt allocation. And those and through close work with the targeted early help, there is a coordinated approach to best support the child. So they identified that early help offer was positive, and that when children, young people were referred in through our front door, through that multi-agency group, that they were quickly passed into that safeguarding Get Safe hub, information shared there, and then the right plan of action put in place depended upon the child's level of need. And if that need was early support, the coordination between the two services was very positive. And as I say, prompt screening, prompt allocation, coordinated support. In terms of the partnership working, so that hub is a multi-agency partnership group. But as I say, that hub works alongside all of the different teams. And what Ofsted found was that those targeted interventions, whether it be disruption activity or support, this collaboration and that information sharing between partners was much improved since they had been previously visited Herefordshire. So a lot of work had been undertaken around that multi-agency hub across all of the agencies, and Ofsted really recognised much more positive information sharing and working together. And we were able to give them lots of examples of that disruption activity that might be police-led, identifying hotspots where concerns may be bubbling, or groups of children gathering for risks, or groups of perpetrators or potential perpetrators, and disruption as well as prevention activity was there. And that's what they were finding in that collaborative approach to risk management, leading to reliable decision making about next steps. So they were very positive about our information sharing, structured, embedded, multidisciplinary analysis and evaluation, all there enabling us to do that, as I say, targeted and disruption, as well as support activities, as I described earlier. In terms of working with children, young people and families, Ofsted did say that children and families are encouraged to attend our MACE meetings, multi-agency criminal exploitation meetings. And of course, the more engagement of children, young people and families, that helps their understanding and ownership of planned intervention. Ofsted asked us in the letter to consider how the initial information meeting might be more productive if we gain parental and young person consent and engagement at this very early opportunity. The process is that when the referral comes in, as we do with all referrals, we share the information as a multi-agency group in order to make a decision on where that case should go. Those meetings are professional meetings, professional conversations. And it is valuable that we have those professional conversations, particularly in the area of exploitation, because sometimes there's information there that is soft police intelligence, confidential information that we just need to share that may help us determine what's the right level of potential concern for this child and family, and whether or not it needs to go into the Get Safe team or whether it doesn't. When we go into the Get Safe team, there is an initial MACE meeting, and parents and children are always invited to those initial meetings and then the subsequent review meetings. What we needed to do is to make sure that that was clear across the services and clear to children and families, because obviously that definitely got a little bit confused within the inspection process. But what Ofsted found was that children are engaged in their assessments and in their plans. Some of the plans they said presented as formulaic, but what they said was that whenever they met the workers were really able to describe a very child-centred, bespoke plan for the child. So what they were saying to us is that the language was formulaic. We will undertake some preventive activity. We will, meet with the school and the police to look at a activity to disrupt a local group. Formulaic, standard kind of responses, as opposed to what we will do for Sarah, what we will do for John, what we'll do with this particular school. But when Ofsted spoke to the workers, they were able to describe the detail and the bespoke plan for the child. So what they said was, just make sure that you're writing in your plans the language that the young people are using and that the workers are using, and just steer clear of kind of stock standard phrases that you're putting in plans, because that's not reflective of the practice that we heard. And then in terms of the quality of practice, we were really pleased that as part of the inspection, the inspectors looked at the assessments for children across the service, as I say, so exploitation isn't just in that one team, it's across the services, and they looked at the assessments that have been undertaken for those children, and they identified that there was an improved quality in those assessments to what they had seen previously. They described the assessments that they saw as detailed, reflecting overarching needs and an exploration of risks to the child. They said that those risks were well understood and led to effective protection, action and support. Ofsted noted that there was a small number of children with complex needs who were in our care, who had got placement disruption. Some of them, not all of them, outside of the local authority areas, but that instability in that placement obviously presents greater risk to the vulnerabilities of the child, for them being targeted and being able to take up that support particularly around exploitation. So as a response to that in the service, the service manager, the service director, working with the service managers and the team managers, has actually identified a number of cases where she is leading a critical review. So a senior management critical reflection of those cases. There were about just under 20 of those cases where we've got children, young people who are in those teenage years that are disrupted in their placements, and we need to think about how do we stabilise those children, and can we, given what we know about Herefordshire and the challenge with historical practice, what can we do now, bringing some fresh eyes, some fresh scrutiny to those cases. So that critical senior management reflection is about challenge as well as reflection. Have things changed for the child? Have things changed for the family? Is rehabilitation something that we could look at for that child? Would that be a safe option? If not, what is it that we can do to try and restabilise this child from in this placement or in a different placement? So those reviews are taking place. I know, I think Tori Lynch, who's the service director, has done about 7 of those. When I met her just before Christmas, she'd done about 7 of those. So there's a commitment to go through all of those cases in that response. Ofsted recognised that the service had already, we presented in their opening presentation, that we know that we needed to increase the numbers of children who were receiving a missing from care or missing from home interview. We can see, I can already see in Q3 that we have increased the numbers of children. You haven't got Q3 data yet, just seen it myself, but we have certainly increased the numbers of children that are taking up those interviews, but I'd like to see that increased further. There's about 60%-ish of children that are offered the interview who take up the interview, and I'd like to see that much higher. But when those interviews are undertaken, Ofsted was recognising that those are timely and they do enable the child to share valuable information. We talk about push-pull factors. What made you go missing from home? What made you go? Were you running to something or were you running away from something? And the quality of those interviews are very good. We just need to up the uptake of them, or the take-up of them. In terms, continuing with quality, Ofsted looked at our revised guidelines and our revised process for doing case file audits. They felt that those revised guidelines that we had done in September this year had resulted in a much more accurate understanding of practice. And actually, for the first time, Ofsted, although they look at many, many cases over the days prior to landing and the days that they're with us, they have a deep dive on 6 particular cases that they select from a range of audited cases, and they look at what we've audited and then they audit the cases as well. And for the first time they had agreed with our audit, so that revised judgment, that revised guidance to our auditors. And our new process is we have 2 auditors to every case. They independently audit it, and I think we've explained this before when we looked at auditing processes. Those 2 auditors were recording a separate outcome, and what Ofsted said was actually it would be helpful if you combined that as one outcome so it didn't get confusing for workers. Sounds obvious, doesn't it? So we've just made sure that we do that. We were doing that on the moderated but not on all of them, so we've got that in place now, so we have a single record of the outcome of the audit. And then the final area was management and leadership. Ofsted found that there was a renewed focus on areas of the service that needed to improve, a refreshed improvement plan they were positive about, and they were very positive about staff being consistently positive about leadership and senior managers, their availability, consistent message from staff about a drive to improve, with staff reporting visible, approachable leadership who seek views of staff, meaning that staff feel invested in and listened to. And in their findings, they also include that a significant progress on improving performance management is enabling leaders to understand what's improved and where further improvement is needed. And that will always be the point of an Ofsted focus. Do you know yourselves well? Do you know what you're doing well? Do you know the difference you're making to families? And do you know what you need to improve on? And are you doing something about it? And if you can say yes to all of those things, that's what makes you a good service. They recognised that supervision was now taking place regularly for staff, which is really good, but not in all cases was it effectively addressing that drift in all cases, and that tied in a little bit to those complex cases that are very bumpy and children are unstable. And as a response to that, we kind of revised and revisited that need for workers who do a 3-monthly progress report on each case, and we've asked them to include in that the last 3 supervisions and the recommendations that were made at those supervisions in those 3-monthly audits, so that when the manager then does that further supervision in January, for example, on the October, November, December 3-month summary, that they can see those previous 3 supervisions. And it's just a tool to prompt those managers to look back on, well, what was agreed 2 months ago, 3 months ago, 1 month ago. We've got a lot more stability in managers now, so that in itself will also help that. And Ofsted did recognise that we are starting from a low base, but starting to have that improvement with permanency. And of course, as I say, that regular supervision and knowing what, if you were the manager 1, 2, 3 months ago, then that stability and that reflection comes more into place. So overall for us, it was a really positive monitoring visit, and I go back to the overarching where the findings were that we identify children at risk of exploitation quickly, we promptly act, and we deliver the right service at the right time, but whether that be early help and prevention intervention, whether it be hotspot disruption activity, or whether it be child protection support at the other side of the scale of concern.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, and a very comprehensive overview. I can see that we've been joined online by Superintendent Helen Wayne, and I think that this might give the committee an opportunity, if you want to ask Superintendent Wayne about the Get Safe element, as obviously that is the police are an important partner in that. Can I just check, Superintendent Wayne, are you actually there, and can you see and hear us? Ah, you are. Great, and we can hear you. Yeah, brilliant. Does anybody have any questions to start? Yeah, Councillor Proctor.
So I guess my reflection when I read the monitoring report was it seemed normal. Like it seemed like Ofsted had come in and they've said these are the things that are going well and here are some areas for improvement, and that seemed, compared to some of the other things we've had from Ofsted, that seemed like a really positive step. So it's in that context I asked these a couple of things. So the plans being formulaic and not kind of child-centred, I feel like that we've heard that before in other parts of the service. So what is it that what is it more that we can do to try and make sure that staff are writing non-formulaic plans?
I think it's the feedback, and I would say that feedback is in the context of Ofsted saying that the workers that were working with the children knew their children really well. They'd engaged them, they'd heard their voice, whether it be missing return interviews or whether it be the Get Safe team or other workers in terms of those assessments, they understood the risks. So it's about that physical recording. How easy and quick can you do that? It takes longer to record what the child said, just that child-centred way. I felt, it was positive that all of the workers, and Ofsted did put this in the letter, that the workers were able to describe very child-centred work. It was when they read the formulaic wording. So it's about caseloads, it's about time. We're looking at developments of IT, for example, that just make those processes a little bit easier, a little bit quicker. Even recording meetings, it's a fine balance, isn't it, in terms of recording a meeting with a child, and in order that you can then capture exactly what they've said and put it into a report and feel like you're going into a meeting with a child where you're recording what they're saying. So it is that, and it's stability of the worker with the child, and being able to put that into the plan. So we've fed that back, and we've given examples. I've done a couple of sessions actually with the whole service around examples of, if we record something like this in this way, then it's not wrong, it's factual, but actually when you read it back, it doesn't feel like you've owned the parent or owned the child or felt like you supported them, whereas if we record it like this, it does. And that, to the staff conferences, and then of course that's cascades down as well. So a little bit of everything, a reminder of how important it is, some IT technology that we're developing to see if we can make it quicker to translate for workers what was done on a visit, what was done in direct work into a plan, and some examples as well around what good looks like in this space.
Can you just remind the committee why it's important? Because Ofsted says it's important, you've just said it's important, but why is it important?
Because we're sharing the plans with the children and young people and the families, and so they need to read what it is that they have shared is their concern, and they need to understand what it is we're trying to achieve in the plan. And that's why, if you're reflecting what they've said and what actions are more meaningful, as I say, I can't think of an example off the top of my head I can brought on, but you know, if you're actually reflecting the words back in terms of what the child said, and you're reflecting, you know, they will engage and understand, that's what it is, I said that, and you're doing this in order to address what I said, rather than we want to reduce the risk of exploitation. So you might say formulaic, we want to reduce the child's risk of exploitation when they leave school, when they get when they get home. That would be a formulaic. That's factual. That's what we want to do, because what you've identified in this case is that when that child leaves school, that's when they're wandering around the streets for a little bit longer. They go to the local shops. That's a bit of a hot spot, and that's where the risks are. Formulaic is we want to reduce the risk for the child between, school and home, that kind of thing. Whereas if you do it in a child-centred way, you might put, Sarah's described that when she leaves school, she doesn't always walk home with somebody. That's when she feels a bit more vulnerable to people that, might pressure her to join their groups. And so what we're going to do in our plan is make sure that, mum picks Sarah up from school, or make sure that we help Sarah identify a friend that she can walk home with. That's more child-centred, so that if I'm Sarah and I read that plan, I understand what you're going to do, but more importantly, why you're doing it. That makes sense.
Thank you. Superintendent Wayne, I've got a question, and it really relates to the whole get safe approach. I know we talked about it probably a couple of years back, and it's good to see that this is in place. I'm just wondering, first of all, does this mean that the risk to children being exploited in Herefordshire, does this minimise the risk? Having a get safe approach, sort of how does that impact children in Herefordshire? And also the other question around that is, how does the think family approach sort of sit alongside the get safe approach? So that's a question from me, and then I know Councillor Harvey has a question, and then Councillor Highfield and Councillor Cornthwaite next. So that's my question, if that's all right. Then we'll come to Councillor Cornthwaite. Thank you.
So in terms of the first part of your question, I think what it means is that where children are identified as at risk of exploitation outside of the home, that there is that structured approach in partnership in place to put protective measures in place. And obviously referrals can come into Get Safe from a range of partners and from families themselves. And it's becoming embedded. It's a really excellent, tried and tested approach that will be working really effectively. I guess what it can't do is protect children where we don't have that intelligence or have that information in respect of their vulnerability to exploitation. So it will include, children who we come across within policing about whom we have concerns, and also who other agencies come across. So it will absolutely be improving the protection of children from exploitation across Herefordshire. To answer the second part of your question, in terms of the sort of wider family approach, that links into what, and I only caught the tail end of what Tina was saying, but in terms of the work that is done to involve families and to inform families of what's going on, to make sure that they are included in protecting their children from wider exploitation. So I think the two go hand in hand.
Thank you. And I'm just conscious, before Councillor Cornthwaite's question, is that something that is actually, the Think Family approach is embedded in the Get Safe process? Is that something that you feel West Mercia Police, you've taken that on board completely, or is there still considerable work to do with regard to that?
So we're doing a lot of work at the moment, not so much focused around Think Family, but focused around Voice of the Child, which is obviously closely linked, to ensure that our frontline staff absolutely understand what they should be looking for, what they should be putting in child risk assessments, to make sure that other partners can then implement any interventions or multi-agency discussions that are needed to protect and safeguard children. So that's our area of focus for the moment. But I think that again is closely linked to the Think Family approach.
Thank you. Councillor Cornthwaite, your question.
Question or two. They relate to Tina's report. Thank you, Tina, for the report. So I just want to, and these are questions really for myself. When you talk about missing from care interviews, I wanted to know, is it a voluntary attendance that the young people have?
Yes, on the basis that you can't make a child speak if they don't want to speak. It's that voluntary. But sometimes for some children, we do have to make sure that we keep the offer open. They might not want to engage straight away. And that for me is how we can improve our take-up. I think what we do well is when a child's returned, obviously we can't do an interview until they've returned or been located. So I think those that want to accept those quickly will accept them when we do those interviews. I think it's those that say, no, I don't want an interview, I don't want to speak to anybody. And I think we need to keep offering, even if at one point there was well, there still is actually, when missing from home and care interviews kind of came into force, one of the reasons that was reinforcing that was to understand whether it was a push or pull factor. And one of the concerns, there was some historical institutional abuse, for example. And so rather than thinking that children are going missing to something, actually it was opening our minds, learning, this was years ago, to they may be running from something. And on the basis of that, there was the development of missing from home interviews to them being done by somebody independent of the care provision, whether that be the parent or the residential worker or the foster carer, just in case it was something that they were running from. Does that make sense? And then, of course, the other element of the value of a missing from home or care interview is if something's happened to the child whilst they've been missing, the faster you can get that information, the better. And so with that came kind of a requirement for a target timescale for those to be completed within 72 hours. And you can understand where that comes from. Positive, you know, if actually I've been the victim of harm and abuse while I've been missing, we need to get that information quickly and we need to get it to the police quickly so that they can do that criminal investigation. That said, for me, there is something about those children that may have been missing, and bear in mind, missing might mean that they've been missing for 4 hours and then they've returned. They're just not where they should be, and we don't know where they are. So they've been missing, and they may have come back and said, I don't want an interview. I think for those children, we need to go back and say, are you ready now? Can we do an interview now? And for some of those children, it doesn't have to necessarily be the independent worker. It could be the social worker or the family support worker that are doing those interviews with children. I think we just need to make sure that we are understanding why the timescales were there, why the independent people were there, and not restricting ourselves on processes and approach to meet these things. We need to understand, if we understand these, then it means that actually a social worker can say 3, 4, 5 days later, do you want to talk to me now about where you went and what happened when you were there? Because that's better than not having anything. Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
So that's where I think our target needs to be, to up the number of children that are doing those activities.
Thank you. I'll try and group the other questions together. Are all families now seen face to face? And do we have oversight of private fostering? And is that included in your Ofsted report?
Yes, we see families face to face. We go and see families, children, young people, visits. Yes, we do. That might be supported by some virtual visits as well, but the statutory visiting to children is face to face. Private fostering wasn't included in this particular focus visit, but private fostering is something that we're aware of. I can't remember now why I was looking at it just last week, but I was.
Annual report.
I was looking at it.
Private fostering, we've had the annual report.
Maybe that's why I was looking at it. But we were checking out, why we've got very low numbers of children who are in private fostering. So one of the responsibilities of the local authorities is that we communicate what is a private fostering, what's the definition of a private fostering. And so we need to make sure that we're proactive with what that definition is. So if people come forward to tell us about a private fostering arrangement, they can also understand what the benefits for them will be as private foster carers, rather than them just feeling that there is a bureaucratic system in which they have to report that they are private fosters, because they're not paid carers. They are arrangements that are made by families with somebody that's not a blood relative for a specific period of time. For a child under 16, there's a definition in there. So we just need to communicate, but it wasn't included in this focus visit, but it probably will be included in the next focus visit.
I think my only alert was that I met somebody who was fostering a child privately, but it was by something other than the council. So the council did not have oversight over that particular thing, and they weren't being visited. And I had a real concern over why that was happening. So that's why I mentioned it.
If they are a private foster carer, helpful if you let me know, because I can follow that up. So if you are a private foster, if you are privately fostering a child, it's not an arrangement that is made by the local authority. It is a private arrangement between the parent and the carer. But the local authority do have a role. The value to the parent is that we can undertake those safeguarding checks, and the value to the carer is that we can support them with advice and information, but they're not paid arrangements, and the local authority do oversee them, and they do a proportionate visits and early suitability agreements at the beginning of arrangement. So but we do communicate through schools, through health visitors, through the people who are most likely to come across what a private fostering arrangement is. But with the turnover of people, they're valuable things to just make sure we keep getting out and about to remind people what they are. So if you want to let me know, I can follow that up.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, you had some questions?
Yes, I did, Chair. Thank you. And I'd like to start off by recognising all of the positive comments that are made in this report, and congratulating everybody involved in the progress that's clearly been being made on the improvement journey. So thank you very much. But as you would expect, I'm going to be focusing down on some of those areas of improvement, but I don't want to go ahead on that without saying the nice bit first. Right, there are kind of three areas that I wanted to touch on. It's mentioned in the report, and you've given some feedback on this about the variable quality of risk management and of the generic language used in reporting, which then differs when the inspectors were talking with individual members of staff. The question for me in that is that where the report is also recognising that we still do have turnover in terms of staff and their social workers assigned to particular families. Where generic language is used, it's not just an issue in terms of the family not recognising their own voice in the plans that are put together, but it's also less meaningful for the next member of staff who comes along and picks it up, because they haven't got the context that the member of staff that's been spoken to by the Ofsted team has in their heads. So, and it is something that we've spoken about a number of times as a committee while we've been talking about this improvement journey. But while we have a high turnover, a higher turnover than we would like, even though it might be reducing, the translation of knowledge from tacit to explicit is even more important than it is under normal circumstances. And it's important under normal circumstances. And we've been told for a long time as councillors that, you know, getting our staff to actually put it down on paper, get it into the records, seems to be a really tough uphill journey, where, you know, for all sorts of reasons, time pressures, workload, the difficulties of actually using the software itself. Independent of all of that, it's still really important. And so I'm just kind of wondering what can we do to get that message across to help to make that happen, particularly while we still have this higher than we would like turnover of, you know, sort of key worker relationships with families and children. So that's the first question. The second one, I was intrigued by the comment that children with high and complex needs that are known to us and have been known to us for a long time seem not to be, in all cases, receiving timely interventions. And I'm just wondering whether there's anything to do with that family and that child being, you know, with us for a long time. That is there any dimension to do with that longer term relationship, which is having us slower to respond to them because they are well known to us? And whether or not that's the case, what is it that we're doing about that particular comment? Because those young people, that family is going to be with us, sounds like, for a lifetime, whether they're under children's cover or whether they then become adults with high support needs. The third point is around supervision and management oversight still needing improvement. You commented on that, but really from 2015 and earlier, as councillors, we've heard even from the time when the service first went into needs improvement, that we were not getting the supervision and the management oversight right, and that's really that is absolutely in our own gift. It's how we do things. And I hear what you're saying about supervisors, managers being encouraged, reminded to actually provide reports, including the feedback on the guidance and the actions that have been agreed in previous supervisions. But there's a little bit of me that's thinking, well, if you're needing to remind them to do that, I mean, that's kind of what the supervision's all about. And so there's something behind these sort of three things that is having me worrying that there's a little bit of, honouring the process, if you like, in terms of handle turning without actually feeling it.
Okay. I agree with the points individually, and I want to respond to them individually. I understand what you're saying, but I don't have that same concern that these collectively mean that people within the system, whether they be the frontline workers or the frontline managers or indeed the senior managers, are not connecting the dots and have a distance of ownership and wanting to get it right. I don't get the sense of that. I think they are distinct things that, for a range of reasons, can be really challenging to get right in all of the cases. In terms of the languaging plans, I think I've tried to kind of say, the different mechanisms that we're trying to do to make sure that we get that language right. But I absolutely agree. It's even more essential in cases where you do have a turnover of workers as well. But it's absolutely essential that the child and the family recognise what's said in their plans. In terms of the long-term cases, Ofsted actually said a very small number of cases when they did their visit, and I think they'd identified 2 cases. I don't think in those cases it was about that these are families that have been with us a long time. but we didn't just stick to the definition of that placement disruption when we identified the 20 cases that the senior management have made a decision that we will bring fresh eyes and fresh scrutiny and challenge to. We went wider than that. Those cases that Ofsted identified and that are those long-term children in care and disruptive are really those young people who are just getting older and older, and it's not uncommon to see that challenge when those young people get older, in their late teens, some early, but in their late teens, those 14, 15, 16, and they start to question whatever arrangement they're in actually. Where's my birth family? Where's my family? Why did I come into care? Adding to that a little bit of, I want a bit more freedom, I want to be able to go out. Adding to that the risks of exploitation that we know exist, particularly with vulnerable children that are in care. So whilst they're pushing for a bit more freedom and being teenagers, those caring for them are being a bit more restrictive because they're a bit more worried. These are the kind of things that are destabilising those children, young people's placements. So as I said, doing that overview scrutiny is, though, looking at, is it that this child's got older, their wishes and feelings are different, their needs, importantly, are different, and their level of protection is different. And is it that we can match those different needs with a move on and a change in the parenting abilities of those parents? So if there's improvement in the parenting situation, and you've got a young person who's now 14, 15, who is adamant that they want to go home, is it that actually we can do something that manages that risk, that minimises that risk that we couldn't do 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, that we can do now? Because if we don't, we see that this child is just facing another 15, 2 or 3 years of just battling with their carers or the local authority. So we are looking at that in those cases. Is rehabilitation a feasible plan in the interest of the child? It won't always be. Where it is, we will absolutely support that. Where it's not, we then need to look again. Where can we think again, rather than just keep thinking about how do we stabilise, what can we really think out of the box, what can we do very differently? And for some of that, it might be bringing the child, for those that plays, it might be bringing the child back into Herefordshire, where they're at least more local to family, or it might be just bringing them back into Herefordshire because that's where they want to grow up and return to. It might be moving them out of Herefordshire. We have to look at those scenarios, but we are looking, we're taking very seriously the need to reflect that whatever decisions were made back then, the circumstances now will be different. So we are bringing the independent reviewing officer, we're bringing the team manager, we're bringing the service manager, and we're having that scrutiny by a new to Herefordshire, independent eyes, but also experienced in children's services as well, just to, are we doing absolutely the right thing that we can for this child? So, and I think that's the way forward, but there isn't an indication for me that in those cases, it's all about, we've just been working with these families a long time. It is a range of those things. And in terms of the management and supervision, I've talked before around the quality assurance programme that we've got, the overarching umbrella programme. But in each service area, we have now got every quarter a new quarterly quality assurance programme that will deep dive. And from our case file audits I've described before, we are now able to identify which service area, which team, which person is getting the RIs, is getting the inadequates. Where are we seeing that not improving, so that we can really deep dive, and that those deep dives on, is it plans, having a deep dive on plans in a particular area that don't have that language? Is it having a deep dive on the quality of supervision? These are the things that we are now in a position where we can build into the quarterly reviews to try and break that as you say, that repetitive cycle of we've not got it good enough for enough the majority of children, which is what we're obviously looking for.
Councillor Highfield, you had a question, and can I just say that obviously we've got quite a full agenda. So if it's all right, raise your question. I have one other small question. Maybe we can hear back from Councillor Powell and then and Councillor Proctor.
Mine does take it into the partnership.
Okay, could your question wait for the partnership then? And yeah, so if we do it that way, and then we can move on to the partnership item. Thank you.
Yes, this is about supervision management. We know that we have unavoidable at the moment problems with permanents and non-permanents, staff leaving. We're addressing it slowly and it's getting better. But in the circumstances that we are currently in, if there is a particularly difficult case, is there in every case an effort to make sure that there is a consistent level of caseworker and manager that is allocated to that particular case because it's obviously a difficult one? Can you be assured that that consistently happens?
I guess it depends. You know, there are different definitions of what makes a difficult case. It's important for all children. If you're at the threshold of a social care intervention, they're all complex, potentially difficult cases. So the stability is important for every child in every case. But when we allocate cases, we will look at the experience of the worker. Yes, if a child's had multiple changes of social worker and their agency worker leaves and we're needing to allocate another one, and we can see that they've had lots of agency workers, unfortunately, that we've been able to unavoid, then yes, we're likely to say, actually, we need to give this child to a permanency worker because they've now had 3 agency workers, for example, that in unforeseen circumstances have moved. Most of our agency workers are not time limited. They are long term because of the workforce situation that we're in. So we would take into account not allocating a case which has got key issues and key things taking place to an agency worker, for example, that we knew was only going to be here because they're covering a maternity for 6 months, if the case was going to be in court, for example. But we'd also take into account the complexity of the case with the skills and experience of the workers. And a lot of our workers who are that experienced are our agency staff. So we're very much trying to attract experienced workers and experienced managers that can support the more inexperienced workers. So there's a range of things I think that you have to take into account, and we wouldn't be able to say for every case that's complex or difficult, we're going to make sure there is a permanent worker, because we don't have sufficiency in our workforce of permanency to be able to do that. But we would take those things into account.
Yeah, I've got nothing against the agency workers compared with the permanent staff. Some of the agency workers I've come across have been excellent.
Yeah.
What I was more interested in was that you would allocate an experienced caseworker and an experienced manager where there is a clearly difficult case. And I've obviously asking this question from knowledge of an absolutely disastrous case where that was not done, and it's very recent. So I was hoping that you'd say that there are steps in place to try to avoid that sort of situation occurring again. I don't want to go into the details of that one case here because it might identify somebody, but maybe I'll speak to you about it later. But it is important where there's a particularly, in this particular case, a disastrous case that got through the cracks. So there needs to be a system to make sure that the manager and the caseworkers allocated are experienced and are going to stick with that job and not going to just disappear and somebody else comes in and has to try and pick it up.
Well, that's what I've said. There is a system. The system is that we would look at the complexity of the case, we would look at the skills and the experience of the workers available, and we would try and match the two. Our agency workers are not short-term. If we know that they're going to be short-term for a reason, then we wouldn't allocate them a case that we know is going to be complex or have key issues at the point that they're leaving or after that they've left, if they've done the pre-work. So those things are factored in.
Clearly they're not. We'll talk about it afterwards.
Thank you. My question actually does relate to something that you were saying, but it's the support for physical and social engagement. So why do some children in care and care leavers lack access to physical and social activities that could benefit their mental health and reduce isolation? And what strategies are we putting in place to address those and make sure that those children actually have the opportunities, which I assume would then be helpful in preventing them from sort of drifting into exploitation potentially? I imagine that's why it's been flagged up.
Well, I think it was particularly in relation to the couple of cases that were more disruptive. It wasn't that it's not available, all the activities available to all care leavers. The degree to which they want to engage, it can be a challenge. As I say, it's always about making sure that we don't get ourselves into that position where we think, well, we've offered to see if you want to join a gym or to see if you want to join a swimming club, and you didn't, and so we forget to offer. We just make sure we keep offering and we keep offering to get that engagement. But of course, the more stable the young person is within whatever care arrangement it is, the more likely they're in a routine, the more likely they're going to engage in something like that. So it's not about those things not being available. It's about making sure that we do everything we can to get that young person engaged and keep that offer open to them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Powell, I think just to wrap up, as the elected member for Children's Services, your thoughts on this item.
Thank you. I'll start by reiterating the point that overall the Ofsted report on this particular subject was stronger than we've had in other areas, and we hope, of course, that that strength will be reflected across other areas of this work. I think it's all this, to a degree, the committee, in fairness, have done their best to reflect that this is very much multi-agency in nature, but you know, by definition, we are here and we largely focus on children's services, but we do need to reflect this absolutely has to be, and it's recognised by the partnership, in fairness, has to be a multi-agency effort to make sure that not only professional agencies actually, but our communities are aware of these kinds of risks, are alive to them, and are prepared to elevate their concerns when they see them. And I can absolutely guarantee that at the front door is the Children's Services front door, but it receives referrals from across the agencies. I can absolutely guarantee that where a referral comes from a member of the public or a community member, it isn't, you know, it's a kind of accepted, it isn't subject to a bit of a probe around, well, did that particular agency or that worker understand the thresholds guidance and what could they have done? So a big message about community acknowledging this, accepting it does happen in Herefordshire, being prepared to make referrals in, and indeed being willing to be part of the solution, which they often are. An overarching need to recognise the multi-agency nature of this to make it effective, and I know there is a future item at future scrutiny planned, and maybe in planning we could explore how we do some of that. And as a separate matter, obviously the very direct questions to the director have been about her department, her staff, but of course let's not reflect that supporting not only the Herefordshire Children's Safeguarding Partnership, but at the West Midlands regional level, there are a whole range of West Midlands level regional safeguarding procedures and policies which reference national documents, for example, the Home Office Disruption Toolkit, so Tina referenced, supporting families, supporting children, but also tackling perpetrators, and that very much is the domain of the partnership. So to reflect on the positives, but to acknowledge that it is really challenging and complex work, and we absolutely have to get it right for our children and families, who are, of course, by their nature, very vulnerable.
Thank you. I think unless anybody has any recommendations on that item, but I don't see that any have sort of come forward, that we just mark that as noted, and as it dovetails very nicely into the Safeguarding Children Partnership item, we move directly into that. Can I just quickly get any indication as to whether people would like a 5-minute break now before we go? Councillor Cornthwaite, yes? Yes. Can we just take 5 minutes quickly before we start on that? So if we can be back.
Yes, I can confirm, Chair, the live stream is being restarted.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, I'm going to assume everybody has read the report, so I'm not going to ask for a rendition of the report because it's a very long report. But what I would like to do is, as we're starting, perhaps just go to the scrutineer, Kevin Compton, and if you can sort of just speak to the report, and then possibly what we'll do is just look at the challenges. If we can go to Ruth Coles, who's here on behalf of the partnership, just identifying the challenges possibly. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Yeah, I'll be mercifully brief. Firstly, the report covers April 23 to March 24, so you need to bear that in mind because, as we found last time, lots has changed since. So don't be surprised in answer to some of the questions you've raised. You'll be told, yeah, that's all solved now. Some things that are mentioned in the report have already changed. So, for example, we talk about a draft plan for scrutiny. Well, the lead safeguarding partners have agreed plans for independent scrutiny. We did that. That's all been done. And I'm now working to that new plan. I was going to go through a little bit of some of the feedback, but Tina's already done that. But just, you know, the Get Safe, the comments from Ofsted, I think were really welcomed by the partnership because I think they illustrated the partnership got the ability to identify a problem, think about how they're working together, make changes and implement those changes. I've met the Get Safe team and I you know, I do agree with Ofsted when you talked about how they're operating on the ground. And they talk about using police intelligence to identify hotspots and all that. You do get this sense partners are working well in certain areas. That's good. I have put in the introduction, because I'm always very open and honest, the partners, we made a decision collectively. I was a part of that decision-making process, but I chaired the board for the year, so like an interim year. It was a difficult year, transition year, and that I did that. So it's not usual practice, and it isn't practice going forward. I have tried to be independent, but I have, before anyone else says it, I could be in danger of marking my own homework. However, I've tried to be independent. But compared to 22-23, I thought the partnership had made good progress. And I tell you, just very simply for why, I use this phrase, usual architecture. So I'm now seeing as a partnership that's got very secure governance, very clear objectives. I'm seeing a partnership that's using data from audits, reviews and other data to identify issues and then actually tackling those issues. So increasingly I'm seeing the partnership operate in a way I think that characterises good partnerships. Is there more to do? There's always more to do. And it'll be interesting to see what conclusions we draw at the end of this year. But by and large, I thought last year was very good progress on behalf of the partnership.
Thank you. And we will have some overarching questions about the partnership. But Ruth, I just wondered if you would like to just introduce yourself and your role in terms of the partnership. And then, I mean, I did mention that potentially you might like to just speak to the challenges that have been faced, but there may be additionally something else that you feel is important to add to that.
I'm Ruth Coles. I'm Quality Assurance Lead for the implementation of Working Together 2023, which is statutory guidance that was published in December 2023. And I'm also chair of the Quality and Effectiveness Group. I took over chairing of that group in September, October this year. So I'm probably not best placed to talk about the broader challenges for the entirety of the partnership. I would say there has been excellent. One of the challenges was the implementation of Working Together 2023, as in terms of it being a requirement. There has, however, I can't say there's anything, I think there's been excellent engagement with that, a really great joined up multi-agency approach to that. In terms of challenges around the Quality and Effectiveness Group, I think Kevin's touched on that there's been improvement in that area of work. A particular priority is to build on the data set, the multi-agency data set that has been formed, but needs further refinement in terms of the analysis that is undertaken from a multi-agency perspective, rather than seeing 5 different sets of data, looking at that as a collective in terms of analysis, and also broadening it slightly. I think those are the areas that I feel able to comment on in terms of challenges, if that's okay, Chair.
That's great, thank you. And I know that Councillor Proctor and probably Councillor Harvey will have questions about data. It's inevitable. I have one question, if I could kickstart. Just looking at the item that was the governance and membership support, and referring to Working Together 2023, which the guidance, the government guidance says effective work from all agencies with parents, carers and families includes principles for working with parents and carers to centre the importance of building positive, trusting and cooperative relationships to deliver tailored support to families. I'm sure you're all incredibly familiar with that. But I did notice that there's nothing within the partnership pledge that refers to the importance of that strand of Working Together 23, that it should include the principles of working with parents and carers for these positive, trusting, cooperative relationships. And it's that Think Family approach which comes, I know I'm a little bit obsessed with the Think Family approach, but it comes back to that whole thing of working with the family. And I feel that within the partnerships statement, if it's going to embed a Think Family approach, which I think has been, from what I can tell, is an objective for this coming year. Perhaps that is something that the partnership would consider.
So, as Kevin was saying, this report is based on last year, and as ever, we're nearly a year on in terms of the work that we've been doing over this year, certainly 3/4 of the work through. What we have agreed as a partnership, and that's already launched and is on the website this year, is the Think Family approach. What is it? What does it actually mean? And a checklist for practitioners. And you will all know that we're doing that work currently with regards to the levels of need and when should we get involved, and with families, and we're also delivering our restorative practice. So I think when we get through towards the end of this year and we relaunch our levels of need, that will be the place where we particularly want to make sure that we reinforce how we work with families, the value of working with families and the value of that Think Family approach, and so cross-referencing those within that same document. But I agree that when we, update and do our next iteration of the reports, then we need to be, very clear that that's part of it. But it will come within the Think Family, the restorative approach, all of those things will kind of come together. So we've done additional work that we need to put within the overarching documents, if that makes sense, which we've been doing this year.
Okay, thank you. Ruth, did you want to come back on that as well?
I think to sort of round out, to add some additional comments around that, in terms of the implementation of the Working Together 23 implementation plan, it is kind of a bit basic, but sometimes you have to get the basics right, and one of them is to revise all our policies and procedures to make sure the 4 principles of collaborative practice with parents and carers is embedded in that, briefings to colleagues, and also through our multi-agency audit practice to test out how we're performing against those standards, to weave it into everything that we do. So as Tina says, creating that overarching framework and then sort of operationalising that as we progress.
Thank you. I think it is really important because it is one of those things that, pace of change is one of the things that comes up all the time. But actually this approach to actually working with the families is something that just needs to be embedded in sort of as a massive cultural change. So thank you for that. Right, I've got questions from, I think it was Councillor Highfield, then Councillor Proctor. Thank you.
Yeah, first I'd like to say, since we last had a report from the Safeguarding Partnership, I'm very impressed with the progress that's clear in the description of what's being done. And as you say, it's not completely up to date, but nevertheless, it's impressive. The one little area that troubled me was in the Safe Team area of oversight. there are 11 different items that are of particular concern that are listed. Starts with gangs, child sexual exploitation, and so on. These appear to be plucked from what's been topical in the national news, rather than what might be specific to Herefordshire, because most of them are extremely unlikely to occur in this county because of our ethnic makeup. And I just don't want us to miss the possibility that might be different types of exploitation or threat to our young people that might be rather different to this, because it's Herefordshire. Herefordshire is different in many ways, and it's certainly got its threats, but most of these I don't think would apply to Herefordshire, or be unlikely to apply to Herefordshire. So are we avoiding looking at anything else?
It's not a plucked list at all. It is all of the list. It's inclusive of everything that's on the national agenda. And it is important that we are Hereford and we need to be very aware of all of those things on the national agenda. It's very dangerous when people start wanting to identify areas, local authorities, or even areas within local authorities, towns, etc., where they think exploitation hotspots are happening, because the risk is that those that are not referenced or mentioned have a false sense of security that in their area, their parish, their town or their local authority, these other things are not existing. And we need to be aware all the time of the potential. The national picture would say that these things are relevant and exist in all areas to varying degrees, or could. And that's why we have that comprehensive overview of all of these agenda items.
That was my exact point. That there are things not mentioned here that could be going on in Herefordshire because we are different. Are we? I mean, we're looking at the national. We're looking at the national list of issues, and
in terms of exploitation.
Yes.
So what do you think in terms of exploitation is missing there?
Drugs, for one.
Okay, so that would come in within county lines.
They're not all county lines, are they? I mean, that's just one example.
County lines is the movement of drugs across different counties.
Yes.
And drugs would exist in there. So just to assure you, the word drugs isn't there, and maybe we need to think about that. But actually, the use of drugs is within all of those things, and substance misuse will be another area of safeguarding that we would be very much looking into.
When your first sentence, when you answered my question, was actually agreeing with me. You're saying you don't want a full sense of security because something is not mentioned, and I'm saying this is a national picture that may miss certain special features of Herefordshire, one of which might be drugs, and it's not necessarily county lines. And I only took that as an example. I don't want us to be saying, oh, well, we're looking at these things, we don't need to look at anything else. For the very reason you said, we don't want a full sense of security, there's nothing else to worry about.
Can we call in Superintendent Wayne, because she's got her hand up and she may have something to assure you.
Thank you. I just wanted to support everything Tina said, but also just challenge the assertion that some of those forms of exploitation should not be considered relevant to Herefordshire because of our ethnic makeup. I think it's very dangerous to link certain types of exploitation or criminality to certain ethnicities. It is simply not the case that there is a link there. So I just wanted to make that challenge.
Okay, well, I'd have to disagree with you, Superintendent Wayne. I don't think female genital mutilation is something that features in Eastern European culture. I don't think forced marriage is something that exists in Eastern European culture. It simply is not the case. Those things are unlikely. I won't say they never happen. We do have some ethnic groups here, but in such small numbers that the likelihood of those things happening here is much less than some other things that don't appear on this list.
So, Councillor, yes. Thank you.
So I think this is the territory of violent disagreement, agreement rather, in the sense that my understanding, what this is trying to say is the Get Safe team looks at a narrower focus of safeguarding than the overall safeguarding system. So sadly, things that you're describing to me like drugs, alcohol abuse, they feature in cases that the Get Safe team don't necessarily get involved with because they're sometimes attributes of families and children. The purpose of the Get Safe is to focus very clearly. And I have to say, yes, the degree, my experience working nationally is that we're all actually more similar than we think, but the degree and the extent, as you're saying, the amount of cases, say, of FGM, whatever, the risk is still here, I'm afraid.
But we will be proportionate.
You know,
on,
exactly.
on the time spent in these different things in terms of, but it's important that our staff are aware of all of them, and we focus on all of them, but then we're proportionate with the amount of time spent on them in terms of the prevalence.
Yeah, and Helen would know, I think tackling county lines is the major source of drugs, I think, Helen, and that's why it's up there as key to, then that's where the children get exploited to carry drugs, for example, they get involved in sale.
From a perspective of child exploitation, if you are talking about drugs, then the most likely route for children to be exploited into criminality or drug use is through county lines. You're right to say that there are drugs issues that don't fit the county lines model, and those will absolutely be captured as and when they involve children, but county lines is the main link through which children are exploited.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor, you had a question.
So I taking on board what Kevin was saying about this report, which is from nearly a year ago, kind of represents solid improvement, and I think you talked about the kind of right architecture being in place. What I find all this kind of quite high level partnership policy stuff quite difficult to kind of get my head around. What I'd really like to understand is if progress continues, let's say at this pace for the next 2 years and 3 months, so that will be 3 years after this report, what will I see, what will children and families see that is different to what they're seeing now, and how will the different partners experience that improvement? What does improvement in this partnership look like on the ground?
I'm just wondering if, in response to that question, maybe we can hear from some of the other partners in the partnership. You know, in terms of your area of service, what would that look like? Anyone? Ruth, do you want to step? Yes, all right.
I can just set a little bit of a scene. So, in terms of what it looks like on the ground, historically, we've had a partnership here where not all of the professional partners have felt like that they have had an equal voice to be heard when we are either assessing or delivering an intervention in a family. So, good partnership looks like the partners, the professionals, and I include the voluntary sector in those professionals, are feeling confident and able to say that they are contributing to our assessments, to our plans, in the way that we work with children and families. The other part is that the children, families, the parents themselves, who will experience multiple professionals involved in assessments and child protection plans, etc., whether they feel that actually having a multiple group of professionals is something that they experience as positive or negative. Are the right people involved, or do they feel overwhelmed with the number of people involved? And what we've done this year is we've introduced that partnership question specifically in the local authority, but through the partnership board, we're asking all of the agencies where they can, rather than have a bespoke, distinct new survey for everybody, but ask the question where they do now. How have you experienced the partnership working? So we've led first with that, and I can tell you that the majority of parents that are feeding back, it's actually very good responses, that parents are saying, yeah, they feel that that multi-agency group, they feel they did work together, they did information share, and the right people were involved. So we're asking parents how they're feeling about it, and we're promoting that in terms of our staff. Do they feel that they are contributing equally to the decisions and things that are being made as well. So that's kind of what it looks like on the ground for families and for staff. I don't know if that helps.
Ruth, did you want to come in?
I think that's the multi-agency work as well, to provide the strategic leaders with a clear line of sight in terms of what practice quality is looking like on the ground is being. I think there's been some really good work then that's been further developed in terms of the multi-agency audit activity that's taken place and is taking place. And that also does centre the voice of children and families. That hasn't happened so much, or as much as we might wanted to, but certainly as our practice going forward. We're doing, just next week, we start a multi-agency audit where we're looking at practicing in electively home-educated children. Multi-agency perspective, multi-agency design of the tool that we're using to evaluate our practice quality, and as part of that we're asking our parent carers to bring their voice to the table. What's been helpful, what hasn't been helpful, have we been treated well, have we made a difference, and that will be fed into that process. So the voice of children and families is fed into the multi-agency working arrangement. Most recently I know some auditing undertaken within the Get Safe team, as it happens, secured the voice of children and parents, and that's been fed into the subgroup that oversees that work, so that it's informing practice development. It's that they're constantly thinking about ways to weave those points, weave our perspectives together, and weave in the voice of children and families, and I think that's improving.
Thank you. At this point, I'd just quite like to bring in Christine Wellington. Sorry to just throw you into it, but you are the head of MASH and assessment, and I think that the MASH is the front door, and in terms of the partnership, it's kind of where everything sort of coalesces really for the facing out team. And so I just wondered if, your views on this question from Councillor Proctor in terms of probably where you've come, because you've seen a lot of changes through the MASH, and where you envisage these changes will put the service at the front door in a couple of years.
So hello, Christine Wellington, Head of Service for MASH. So when I think of what good looks like in the front door for MASH, that is the Children's Service and all the partners working really well together, having those conversations, talking to families, making sure that when we're looking at referrals, that we've got consent from the families to work with the families, and where appropriate, we signpost them to early help rather than the heavy end of child protection. Where we can manage risk, and we see risk and respond timely. For the last year, 2 years, our timeliness have improved, and we're hitting about 97% of all information being assessed and a decision made within 24 hours. And that has continued over the last year, so we're doing really, really well. So for me, that's what good would look like.
That's excellent, thank you. And can I just quickly ask from the health perspective, sort of how you see this, and you will have seen huge changes also over that time, so perhaps that view from our health partners.
Yeah, absolutely happy to start that, and Heather might want to add in. So Catherine Cobain, I'm the Chief Nurse at Hertfordshire Worcestershire ICB, and I've been here for a good part of the journey, and the improvement probably in the last year has been really significant. For example, and a practical one I'm taking, like so Councillor Proctor, and so practically a year ago we had on our risk register the multi-agency ability to safeguard children as a red rated risk on our risk register. It is now not a red rated risk. It is not a risk on our risk register now, because the partnership has made such significant improvements. And obviously there is more work to go, and there will always be more work to go, but as to progressing towards what good looks like, we now have a better understanding of what we're doing, of how we're prioritising, and we have good challenge in the partnership. And I think that to me is what good looks like and feels like. It doesn't feel comfortable all of the time, but we are actively challenging each other, and that has changed significantly in the last year for me.
Thank you. Heather, did you want to come in? Sorry, Kevin, I know that you want to come in, but give Heather the opportunity.
Yeah, so Heather Manning, Head of Safeguarding and Designated Nurse for the Integrated Care Board. So for me, you know, I look at the strategic level, but I also look at the operational level, and part of that for me is the connections that we're building and that are growing with our leaders in our providers, so our organisations linking in with children's services, with education, etc., to formulate those plans around the table for families and children. And I think that has been strengthened time and time again. And what we hope for is that to be further strengthened as time goes on. I think they're looking at the hub working, you know, a different model of working, what that looks like to ensure the right people with the right families in the right place. And the health teams that we've got working with the families are absolutely committed to that as well.
Thank you. Kevin, you had a...
It's always a challenge to evidence the change to the lived experience of families and children because of changes you make in social care, because sometimes it's quite a long-term process. But I do share the challenge, and I'm constantly thinking of ways we do that. This emphasis we've now put on getting feedback from families, Tina's the chair of the board, and the board in my Scrutineers plan, there's this task, get out there and hear the voices, tell us what's really happening. So sometimes it takes a long time, but I'm just looking for children who are safe and more cared for. I go into the MASH now, and I believe there are families out there who are getting an intervention that they wouldn't have necessarily got in the past. That means their children are not going to go after in the statutory pathway. Now, the way I'll test that is we'll look at the evaluations of feedback coming from that. And I must share this because it had such an impression on me today. Somebody I was in the MASH today, and Sue, who works in there, got an email from a colleague who had come across a child she'd dealt with some years ago, was at risk of exploitation. The circumstances, they were on a child panel, who asked that colleague to send an email to Sue that says, 12 years ago, you saved me. You changed my life. Now, I want to find more of that. I do believe, because of the things we're doing here, that there's more chance of that now than potentially there was before. So they get safety, gets greater focus on seeing, greater focus on the contextual issues. So it is always a challenge, but if we dig deep enough, we can get the stories and the evidence, can't we, Tim?
And I think that what you're talking about, that feedback from families and the children themselves, is absolutely crucial in terms of judging the impact, because otherwise we're just never going to know whether all the services have had any impact on the lives of children in the county. Right. Councillor Harvey, then Councillor Proctor, then Councillor Highfield. Oh, you come back on that.
Thank you. I found that very helpful. I think for me, possibly because I've spent too much time in the voluntary sector, what I'm kind of looking for is a theory of change. So you all expressed some very clear kind of process and output things that you expect to happen, and I think it's probably kind of tacit about what the outcomes of that would be, but it's not so explicit, and so it would just and it feels like this might be a good time. So this is not inventing a theory of change. This is just writing down what I suspect you all agree is the path from improve. And I personally would find that helpful, and I think in terms of Kevin's challenge of how do we evidence this, that might be a helpful way forward. And if I can just one thing that I'm fascinated by is we have the three kind of working together statutory partners, but we do, and you mentioned them, between you, we do have these other very kind of significant bits of the system, but they're structured very differently. So education is an obvious one, and in this report we have Liz Farr attending meetings, but she doesn't employ all the head teachers. She she doesn't. So that, and then when we get into things like childcare and how is the partnership kind of bringing in those other very different bits of the system into what you've just described as kind of meaningful improvement?
I think one of the most significant changes that's been made, certainly since I-22, is that the partnerships worked hard to rebuild those links with the education sector. There's now an education subgroup. In the MASH today, they were telling me about the regular coffee mornings they have for DSLs, designated safeguarding leads in schools. What I believe I found was a school sector that's pretty good, actually, looking after safeguarding, up to date, training, working together, but it was disconnected from the safeguarding partnership for historical reasons. That's all now been rejoined. So that's something else that's moved on. And the feedback from head teachers, the improvement board, they're always very forthcoming in their advice, and they do take. So I think that has been repaired, and the board did look at more explanation of, are we connected enough with the voluntary sector? I seem to remember we had a paper. So again, I think what has shifted in 2 years is a greater, the partnership is working harder at making sure everyone's on board, but that particular link with education I think is very good, and I think Liz and her team do quite a good job now. Well, always done a good job, but it's now reconnected, that's the thing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. And, you know, again, I'd like to start off by saying what a great read this was in terms of seeing the progress that the partnership has been making, and, you know, particularly under your sort of leadership there, Kevin. So thank you very much. And stepping back into your independent auditor role for the comments that you've got in that section of the report, and in no particular order because I've sort of bounced around the report a little bit. I've got maybe a few questions if I can rattle them off, and then you guys can respond in whatever sequence works best for you. So, Kevin, in your section on your comments, one of the things that you say is that you're a little bit concerned that leadership changes within the partnership might impact on progress being made. And I guess my question to you on that is, could you say a little bit more about what that concern is? Because for me, if the work of the partnership is being embedded within the partners, then it should be robust to leadership change within the individual partner organisations. So that's my question to you on that. I was really pleased to read through the recommendations at the end. They all sounded great and made a lot of sense, recognising, as Tina said, that, you know, we're quite a long way through the current year of implementing some of these. And I think, you know, for me, I was itching to see as an appendix or something the kind of alluded to implementation plan with some timescales associated with those recommendations, just to be able to put those in context, given that these sorts of reports always come, you know, well into the following year, just because of the nature of pulling them all together. I was really pleased to see that there's funding for the partnership work, and recognising that the partnership had to be a little bit pragmatic in terms of how it worked with its budget and did without an administrator role for coordinating activity. But I'd just like some assurance that that budget is, you know, there and continuing into this year. Partnerships and partnership working and the communication that's required to be the glue and oil around all of that doesn't just happen. It does take effort, and having a bit of support there to coordinate and manage that is really important. And Ivan, maybe that's something that you as cabinet member here could take away back to your cabinet colleagues, because there may be other areas of partnership which the council is relying on, you know, increasingly as all the pips start to squeak on budgets and things, and making sure that there is that level of funding there in order to help to keep those partnerships together and keep them working and organised and talking to one another is a really important element of sticking everything together. I noticed that police referrals continue to be, a very large proportion of the overall number of referrals that are made, and I'd just like to ask whether the referrals that are actually translating into the next stage of investigation or a heightened level of concern are indicating that the quality and relevance of the referrals that are coming from the police is improving, given that they form such a large proportion of the referrals that need to be investigated or at least considered. And a question, what assurance is sought? I was really pleased to see in the quality assurance section the audit, the descriptions of the audits that have been done. I think that's really worthwhile, and clearly you can't go into great detail, but it's great to see that they're happening, and unpicking some of the reasons why in some areas things look worse on the face of it than they actually were when the audits dived into the detail. That was really a positive outcome on things like the non-core 8 meetings. But my question overall on that audit work is what assurances sought that the learning and the actions from the case audits have then been successfully embedded in the various aspects of the partnerships working. And that's it from me. Thank you.
If I just briefly take, I think there's people more qualified to take some of this, but firstly on the report, it will be published again 1st of September, as it was last year, so we can take it earlier, and I think if we can get it, looking at the director, it's not really my call, but it is possible to bring it earlier next year, okay? So, because I think that more contemporary debate is more helpful.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have a work programme item, so it'd be great to slot it in now in our work programme for, September, October time.
I've had my 50p moan then, so that's it. On the leadership, I mean, one has to notice that, see, I do observe Herefordshire partners, capacity is limited, you're not the best resource, this across, and that churn of leadership was not just at senior level, it's also second, third tier level where people drive the groups. I have to say on the children's side, I think the impact of that change has been managed quite well. And in fact, I think in some cases strengthened the leadership in the children's. I think we've had a few more problems on the adult side where individuals have moved, where work hasn't get bit. So my problem's shifted to the other board that I chair. But I do think that leadership challenge, but your scrutiny, you want people to be aware you've noticed these things, but I think it's been managed pretty well, looking at partners. I think the other, it might be useful, Helen might want to comment, but the police contacts into the MASH, I was in the MASH this morning. Christine, I think that issue's moved on. I don't know if you want to give any details.
Yeah. So in relation to the question about police contacts and referrals, we've been working really hard with the police, particularly over the last 6 months, and we've actually done an audit. So what we're really interested in is when we receive information from the police, are they coming into the right level? Does it really need to go through MASH, or could some of those be signposted directly to early help and to the chat? And which is what we've done. So you will see a reduction and more police contacts meeting the threshold because of the work that we do. Alongside that, as chair of the MASH operational group, we do have police representation. So whenever we think that there's a spike coming or there's a spike, we speak directly to the police in MASH, and there's a task and finish group, if you like, and they look at that referral. The amount that they've sent through, we'll do an analysis and we'll bring it back to the group. So we have made some significant improvements, particularly over the last 6 months. And we do have those conversations where referrals are inappropriate, shall we say. We also no longer look at police intelligence because we used to look a lot. We used to have to accept a lot of police intelligence. So now police intelligence is police intelligence. It doesn't necessarily mean it requires a service.
I'll just take the embedding learning. I was sparing Heather's blushes. She chairs the Joint Case Review Group, and that regular monitors. There's a spreadsheet, there's all the actions, there's what's happened, there's a challenge from partners when it doesn't happen, there's review. When we did the section 11, the audit, where all partners come in and show us how they're complying their safeguarding duties, one of the questions we ask is, can you evidence that learning, particularly from case reviews, has been embedded in the organisation? And the feedback last time was, in many cases, yes, in some cases, no. And where it was a no, we go back and say, well, why haven't you? Have that debate. So there is a mechanism to try and to follow that all the way through. So we try to check that it's been embedded.
That's really helpful. Thank you for those responses.
Funding and timescales from the director.
So I will do funding and timescales in a second. I must admit, I came and reread the priorities moving forward again, which I hadn't read for a while, and I was very pleased, of course, that you look after the practice and the priorities look after themselves. So I was able to go through all of these and tick all of these. So we will have a very positive report for 24-25 because these are the things that, you know, are so embedded and they're so our priorities that absolutely we've been working on them, and so there's a good report there. In terms of the budget, the funding for this year has already been agreed, and it is the same. We are, though, doing a piece of work alongside the footprint for West Mercia Police. The decision-making body for the funding is through the lead safeguarding partnership, so the Chief Constable, the Council's Chief Executive and the Chief Executive of the ICB. It is for them to ultimately decide what the funding envelope will be and the percentage funding debate. And so we've had a couple of reports at our board, and we're tying that into what's happening at the Worcestershire board and the Shropshire board, who share the same footprint, in order to make recommendations. I think we've got that report coming next. But that will be for the budget, not this year, but for next year. So we'll need to look at that. Everybody is committed to partnership funding, but we do need to make sure that we're doing it at the very best value. So yeah, I mean, you know, in terms of the timing for the next report, it wasn't here we were out of sync, was it? So we should be able to finish this report, at the end of this year, and then build it into the scrutiny work programme without a problem.
I think
it'd be nice to do it much closer.
Yeah. I think under Working Together 23, we're obliged to publish by the first, which we did do last year. We will do it again.
Oh, we'll definitely publish before it, but yeah, it can come even before September.
No, I think the only thing that, thank you for the for those responses. That's really helpful to hear. I think the only thing that kind of popped into my head while I was listening to the responses was I might have been able to finesse some of my questions if, as a committee, we were getting sight of the monthly or dashboards that we asked for previously in terms of the Children's Directorate and some of the metrics that we're following on things like referrals and that sort of thing. It is a request that we've made just so that committee members can keep up on the performance stats and, you know, be in a position to ask relevant questions when agenda items come up.
Thank you. Councillor Proctor, did you have your hand up, and then who's next? Okay, you go, Councillor Proctor.
Fortuitously, a question about data. So, looking at the performance and multi-agency data area, I think previously we had a conversation which was along the lines of we haven't got any data at all, and then this is from last year, which is saying we're bringing together lots of data, and I imagine you'll be able to tell me that we're doing lots more with that data. When, kind of generically, when I think about what an organisation is doing with data, you kind of start off not using it, and then you move to looking backwards at what happened, and then you get faster at looking backwards, and then this is where the system is right now. Then you can start looking forwards and making predictions about what happen, and then you can move beyond that and get into data science and modelling. And so I'm interested in where the partnership is on that very rough scale, and kind of related to that, do you have enough resource around bringing data together, analysing data, and potentially some of this more advanced stuff about predicting and modelling, either sitting within the partnership or sitting within the partners?
Shall I start and then you can add in? That's fine. We're definitely not at the future modelling and let's think next stage at all. I think what we've done the work on is to get out of the forever we could have more, we could have more, we could have better, let's have more, because that's been disabling us from actually just looking at some of the basics of what we've got and what it's telling us. So I think we are now in a place where we've got what we've got, and let's look at what it's telling us. So still a little bit, I guess, reactive, because we're looking at what data it's giving us, but we're proactive in let's audit some of those things where we need to understand why it's telling us that, which will then inform the data after the data. That said, we just earlier talked about the footprint, and one of the things that we think is going to be really beneficial for us is and Ruth will talk about this a little bit more, is to establish our data set alongside some counterpart local authorities, and we're looking to join our data group with the Worcester group, who are a bit further on than us within data, and our group, because we share the police, we share health, and actually being able to look at that wider group of that data set and what it's telling us about police referrals, not just for Hereford, but police referrals, what it's telling us about the turnover of conversion. Thank you, Ruth. The conversion of referrals into assessments, etc., etc. So we've got quite an exciting piece of work to bring those subgroups together and develop our data set, but without falling backwards into let's redevelop the data set. We've got the multi-agency programme about the data set that we've currently got. So we're probably at that stage 2, but not 3 or 4 as yet, I would say.
The development work that we've been undertaking to make some refinements to our multi-agency dashboard data set has been done in partnership with Worcestershire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and that's because that brings some efficiencies, the shared footprint, some shared funding. It was an opportunity. And it's so we have agreed, both partnerships have agreed the same refinements, and that and then the idea of working then to have a shared to work together, instead of having 2 boards, that would really pull that together, I think. So I think we're at sort of stage 1.5 maybe is where we're at to do that. And the model that we're adopting is also is about triangulating other information as well, feedback from families, feedback from inspections, just light touch, but just to bring those additional perspectives to help us really triangulate it. But as Tina said, we will. But the intention is to join with Worcestershire, which will bring together that joint work we've already been doing, and potentially some efficiencies for our multi-agency partners. 1 meeting rather than 2. And I feel really optimistic about that.
So if you accept my kind of escalator of where you can get with data, at some point you're going to need specialist skills, not necessarily all the time, but so is that something the partnership is thinking about? Where would we access those skills? When would we be in a position to make use of them? Where would we get the money to pay for them?
Well,
We've been talking about data. Data is the perennial issue, and coming from a public health background, I believe in data, information for action. Fantastic. It's the manana. But as you allude to, Councillor Proctor, that getting to that predictive bit is quite a task. Now, particularly in the NHS, and this is just the NHS, so think about then the wider partnership arena. In the NHS, we've been looking at, population health management. These words come easily off the tongue. But whenever you get into the actual detail of the data and where you're pulling data from and what the data means and what the different sources say, it really is quite complex. And you're absolutely right. We need to think about the future and what kind of capabilities that we're going to have. And we're doing that work, and we're trying to do that work across that wider kind of partnership space. But it's complicated. And I think we got tied up on this quite a bit from when we started. We need data, and we need to be assessing, are we doing a good job? And we kind of got to a point of freezing and not able to actually move any data forward. So I think I'm more content now where we're at, because we're at a very basic level, I would suggest. But from a basic level, you can gain confidence and then move on to a different level where you're actually able to do that predictive, and you're able to increase the capabilities and share capabilities across the piece. Because thinking about the police and the data that we had in the pandemic and things like that, there are capabilities scattered across, but it's not consistent. So I think it's about thinking big, starting small, and getting that confidence and making sure that we're sharing it properly. Then you get into all the governance, information governance piece and everything. Because I act as code-to-cut guardian for the ICB, and that gets into a complicated space as well. But I think it's trying not to get too complicated about it, but think simply and move it forward. And I'm happy we're moving forward now, because we weren't moving forward.
Thank you. Yes, Tina, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I suppose I just wanted to add to that, and that's helpful, Kath, because it makes me think about things. It's also about what is our safeguarding partnership data useful for, and it isn't so that all of the local authority data and all of the police and all of the that's not the safeguarding partnership. We've all got our respective datas that are valuable in their own right, and particularly the public health data, for example, is the key data that is that predictive, what happens next. Local authority social work assessments will tell you what the needs are that we're identifying in an assessment. We'll relate that to, if the highest need is adult mental health, for example, how does that relate to the public health data on mental health? So the safeguarding partnership data isn't about, that's not where we're using that in this space. The safeguarding partnership is what you were saying earlier, was, well, what's the difference to families then? And that's the question around, we've got a multi-agency group of professionals coming, involving ourselves in your family. How are you experiencing that? Have we got the right people around the table? Are we listening to the right people? And how are you experiencing it? Is it overwhelming, or are we coordinating? That's, and as Christine described and Helen described, when it's at the front door at the MASH, are we getting good information, timely, quality, that then we can make decisions on? That's kind of where we're pitching the value and the usefulness of the safeguarding partnership data.
Thank you. I think that's actually really helpful. I'm conscious that Superintendent Wayne needs to leave. Does anybody have a question? Yes, right. We've got one from Councillor Highfield.
I'm going to please Councillor Proctor, because I'm going to come back at you with some data. And it's to illustrate the fact that this list of things that you're supposed to be protecting children from is very incomplete, because it shows, this is Herefordshire's crime data. I'm sure Superintendent Wayne is familiar with it. It shows that drug offences are probably about the third place amongst young people in numbers of offences. 2/3 of those drug offences are dealt with by way of caution, and it is unlikely that county lines drug offences by young people will be dealt with by cautions. So I would think the majority of those cases are local drug cases. And then we will look at another category, which is theft and handling of stolen goods. We're not saying what we know is happening, but in other parts of the country, particularly in London, there have been gangs that have been exploiting young people to steal, because young people, if you look at the actual cases dealt with by conviction rather than caution, theft and doesn't appear, because most young people who get caught stealing get a caution or get dealt with by some way other than a court conviction. But there is still a possibility that that type of exploitation is occurring in Herefordshire, yet it doesn't appear here. And if, and I'm not asking Superintendent Wayne to answer this, but if Superintendent Wayne had been asked to produce a list of the things she fears for young people in this county, I don't think it would be the same as this list. And that's what's worrying me. Okay, that's my point.
Superintendent Wayne, I realised you do have to leave, but you know, potentially, you know, do you want to respond to that, or do you have a 1, 2, 3 list of the things that worry you the most for young people in the county?
Not that I would describe off the top of my head, no. But what I would say is, I think you can't look at simply one facet of the data to determine what the key issues are, and you also can't look at sort of how many cautions we've given for drug offences to describe whether that means therefore that drug offences involving young people are county lines related or not. It's much more complex and multifaceted than the data will allow you to understand. And I will also say, I'm not looking at the list that Councillor Highfield's got in front of him, so I don't know what's on it or not. But also I would say child criminal exploitation, if that is on the list, covers a wealth of different elements. And to his point about theft related offences could therefore include where children are potentially being exploited to commit theft offences, and I would also say sort of the outcomes in relation to that. You know, children may have had a caution, children may have had a community resolution or another outcome, but what we would seek to do, particularly in cases where we believe that crime is being committed by children because they are being exploited to do so, we would look to work through the Get Safe programme that Tina's already spoken about, and through our own intervention and prevention officers to try and safeguard those children from that exploitation rather than criminalise them.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for coming to the meeting. It's been really helpful having you there. Right, moving on slightly, I have a question which is around the case reviews. And again, it comes back to the issue of you know, is the learning from the case reviews being embedded, and I think that we've heard where it has. I mean, the example that might be helpful to hear back on was given of child HN, and in terms of the how that experience has influenced and embedded practice, particularly possibly starting with health partners, I would imagine. So I've got a question around that, and then I've got a question around that sort of difficult area of no man's land where care leavers don't necessarily fall underneath the Children's Safeguarding Partnership, but within the Adult Safeguarding Partnership, and that responsibility that we have with our care leavers to see them through basically until they're 25 and support them. And so when a serious incident happens relating to a care leaver, what happens in terms of a case review? So I have a question around that, and whether there is any sort of learning that's been sort of from that we can actually sort of help change practice moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I just make a start on the first element you've asked about, so is that better? Just thinking about child HN, for example. So we've recently had a joint case review subgroup meeting. Within that, we hold action plans for all the case reviews, all the rapid reviews, any learning that we have. The learning from any of those case reviews is then assigned to either individual agencies if they're single agency, and if they're multi-agency, they may be assigned within the partnership, so into different subgroups, for example, and they feed back into the joint case review subgroup. So as an example for HM, we reviewed that one just in the last couple of weeks. We have got no actions that are red, so have not started, not being moved. We have a large number of single agency actions that are already completed. So of course you have to complete them first before you can move down to looking at embedding, etc. You have to ensure that they're covered first. We've reviewed some that are ready for closure, and we've got other parts then that sit with audit. So for example, he was electively home educated, so we're doing the audit as Ruth mentioned earlier. That's the next stage that's sitting with quality and effectiveness. Where we've got any that sort of have not moved as quickly, what we're doing is meeting in with the agencies that are leading on those and the subgroups to get that feedback. And we're not waiting for the next joint case review subgroup. We're putting tight timescales on those so that that information comes back within a week, 2 weeks, whatever the timescales are set by the multi-agency partners in the joint case review subgroup. So they're all on the tracker. Some are proposed to close. They're all on track. Small parts that are looking what we need to do next to embellish that a little bit and to tighten up that plan, but they are all on track.
Thank you. If I could just come back on that, when I was reading through the documentation, so that for me what stood out were there were issues around, for example, the Section 20 notice, and it seemed that there were which is a sort of voluntary agreement. And it seemed that there was an issue around the kind of parental understanding of that voluntary agreement. You know, is that something that has changed as part of the learning from this process?
I can't see an action specifically about Section 20 on here that's linked through, but I think the conversations around Section 20 was possibly in relation to this case specifically, but I don't know whether Tina's got anything else on Section 20 in more general terms.
Yeah, I know that it's been, I mean, it was a national piece of work in terms of learning for all local authorities, but I know specifically in Herefordshire that having those clearer conversations with parents about when they are agreeing or requesting that their child is on a voluntary basis, and making sure that we've got through the legal process the right letters, the right consent, all of those things in place have been part of the learning work that's been done in Herefordshire over the last 2 years actually.
So would you say that any parent now who was entering a Section 20 agreement would be fully versed in what that meant and the implications?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for your answer, Heather. Just relating to the second part of my question, which was about that no man's land for care leavers, and in terms of case reviews, what learning is to be had, and as you were saying, Kevin, that actually the Children's Safeguarding Partnership seems to be in a sort of slightly stronger position currently.
I think it's a different position in relation to what we do around safeguarding adults reviews. And we're talking as the Safeguarding Board about the language we use, because what we do is in adults is what's called a joint scoping. So agencies come together to make a determination of whether a case meets the criteria for a full safeguarding adults review. And over time we've evolved that here to be on like a rapid review process. But the rules, the GDPR, the protection, all the things that enable us to put rapid reviews in the public domain in children's are not there in adults, because it's not part of the statutory process. So that's the way the reviews are done around adults, and we are reviewing that as there's been some recent requests for information regarding an adult case. That's all I think I'd say at the moment. So it's a slightly different system for adults than it is for children.
Do we have it in our gift to say that if that care leavers, in terms of the Safeguarding Partnership, that care leavers still fall under the Children's Safeguarding Partnership umbrella, so that we're not actually losing sight of what could potentially happen to care leavers and being lost in a kind of swathe of adult experience?
I think there is a gap in the legislation in the sense that the two are governed by different legislation. So is it in the gift of either board? The boards can make discretion. I think it would need a lot of thinking about, and there is some reflection going on about the interrelation between the two systems at the moment here. So it's not easy to reconcile. So a looked after child who dies as an adult, there's no requirement and they're not covered by the child safeguarding review.
Okay,
process and guidance. So there is an issue. I think I've got colleagues who do all the safeguarding boards in the room, and there's some thinking and discussions about that currently. But that's the national situation here and elsewhere. The two are still separate.
Okay. Well, I wonder if, as a scrutiny committee, we could make a recommendation, can be accepted or not accepted, but that may support the argument that, as we're told constantly as corporate parents, that includes the care leavers and that we are responsible for the care leavers, and that we would like to be able to track their development as we would our own children through that kind of ropey time in your early 20s when life can be incredibly challenging, that actually we make sure that as a partnership we're capturing those children, not capturing them as in a child catcher, but that we're ensuring that we actually have we have an oversight that includes those young people, so that if something goes terribly wrong, we have a mechanism by which we can actually learn from that and make sure that that cannot happen again if it's avoidable.
So just thinking about if there was a serious incident or a death, etc., what we have in place already, regardless of whether it's a child safeguarding practice review, a safeguarding adult review or a domestic homicide review, we have a triage process that kicks in within 48 hours, whereby 3 key partners come together. So that's police, health, myself as JCR chair, and social care. And depending on the case, depending on the person and the incident, we will include adults and children's social care in that triage process as well. So we will always discuss with the relevant people around the table in that very, very first quick thinking, what do we need to do next? What does this look like? If we go ahead and agree to do a scoping meeting, whether that be in rapid sort of time for an adult, because they're a care leaver at this point, again, we include all relevant children's representatives to ensure that that whole life story element within reason is captured, and we're not just focusing on the now and their age as a young adult, for example. So we do include those correct partners. What then happens then if criteria isn't met for a case review of some description, we still hold that learning review. We still have all the learning, the actions, the recommendations. They still sit in the joint case review group and they are followed through exactly the same as if a full review has taken place. So they are held and they are discussed, and that's reported into board and partnership.
I think the issue then is, can that information go into the public domain? And that is a challenge in the adults, because there's well-developed protocols and frameworks around children's rapid reviews about how you do that. We don't have that in the adults, and that's something that is being discussed as to whether I ought to talk, for example, as the chair of the Safeguarding Board, to the national safeguarding chairs to see if it's a problem elsewhere and to see if there's a solution. But currently, it's very difficult to discuss individual cases in a public arena.
Yeah, it is difficult. I think the Councillor Harvey, you've got something.
Yeah, I think I would like to request that there is some explanation and guidance for members in the context of our duties as corporate parents under such circumstances.
Okay, well, I think that we'll want to put something like that forward as a recommendation. Did you want to come back on that, Kevin? You looked almost...
No, I think it's about following statutory guidance, and that's what we're obligated to do. And when I was an officer, what I was obligated to advise members to do. But all I'm trying to say is it's something we're thinking about in terms of reviews. But there's no easy answer. Statutory guidance is what we'd always fall back on. So I think that's the most I can say on the corporate parent role.
Yeah.
I can't, on the review, I'm very clear
Okay.
where we are, what we're doing, what the constraints are, and to make any change to that would require quite considerable changes in guidance and so on, and statutory frameworks, etc. I believe.
Okay, thank you. My understanding of how things change is actually people sort of lobbying for that change based on experience. So, I think that it may be timely to make an argument in that way. And, again, it just does concern me as a corporate parent what happens in that no man's land. Councillor Davis, I haven't heard anything from you, or not much, sorry. So I'm just wondering if there's, to put you on the spot, have you any questions or any observations? Or
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair.
Being dropped squarely in it, thank you. No, many of the questions I was going to ask have already been asked by other committee members, although I must admit, from a safeguarding partnership perspective, I was wondering whether or not children who go missing, having discussed it previously about missing return home interviews, those children who are not under our care and normal families who go missing, do they get, I don't like to use the word interviewed, but spoken to after such incidents to try identify things that might have gone on with them, if they have, I don't know, wandered off from their parents in the shops or whatever, and then an alert being raised and it's been passed on to the MASH maybe, or to the police, do they then get spoken to, and does that information get fed back in to help us with our children, our parenting responsibilities?
So if a child is missing and reported missing to the police, then yes, they will get referred to us as a child that's missing from home. They will be offered an interview. But as I say, some of those children, it's unusual. It wouldn't be usual for a parent to refer a child that's been missing for a couple of hours unless they had got some additional concerns, for example, for the whereabouts of that child. And that might be additional because of their age, or it might be because they were already worried about something else and they've not come home on time. So generally, if parents report their children as being actually missing, they've already waited a little bit of time, or they've got additional concerns. So yes, those children are offered return from home interviews, and that is fed into what we understand about why the child went, push-pull factors and those things I've described.
any other questions? Councillor Conthwaite. Thank you.
Really just picking up on what you said, Chair, asking about this thing about being a corporate parent, which when we come onto the council, when we were elected onto the council, we probably didn't have any idea that we were going to be told we were corporate parents. Now, I'm a parent of 6 and a grandparent of 16. That responsibility I know that I've got. And now when I'm told I'm a corporate parent of at least I think it's around 400 if it's every child in care. But there is something about that where we cannot find out about some of the children that we really would need, as a parent, you would want to know about. So who made the decision, or who makes that decision, that we're corporate parents but have no actual authority to find anything out about the children that we want to be parents of? That, in other words, all the children, what should we call them? The corporate children of the corporate parents. Somebody's made that decision that we are corporate parents.
That's a legislative decision.
Sorry?
That's in legislation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more than happy to step up wherever I can to be that corporate parent and look at the responsibilities I've got. But somewhere I think, but there's something there are things we can't find out and things we can't step into that we would actually love to be that person.
It is trying to get that balance between it's in legislation in terms of who are corporate parents. The purpose of that legislation is to give everybody, as you're describing, that positive feeling that they need to do what they can do within their specific role in order to promote the welfare and outcomes for children that are in care. That's the corporate parenting responsibility. But as I say, within that, what is reasonable and proportionate and appropriate for the person within that role, which is where the detail of individual children's cases are not relevant. And then we come into, are not relevant for counsellors, for example, and therefore that's when we come into the need to know to share information proportionately with the right people. So you can be a corporate parent and you can promote the outcomes for all children that are in care by doing things within a counsellor role, and you don't need the individual detail of the case in order to know that, in order to do that, sorry. Just getting the balance between the two.
Thank you for the responses. I realise that we're going to run out of time. I just have one last thing, and I suppose that you may well have addressed this because the report is quite old. But in your comments, Kevin, you talked about the rollout of restorative relational practice with multi-agency practitioners not kept pace with that rollout for children's social care, that some partners have felt left behind. And then you added that the pace of change is still being identified by DfE Commissioner and Ofsted. Emerging issue needs addressing is the restorative model of practice. Can you just speak to that, given that the report is now quite old?
So, I mean, there are partners in the room you can ask. My impression is that is being addressed. There's more multi-agency training now in the restorative model. That wasn't the case a year ago, so before Tina arrived. It was a particular theme of mine because when the Leeds model was first proved successful, I did study it, and one of the keys to it was that all partners signed up for the model. So therefore, I've always had a view that getting the multi-agency sign-up and training to that in an early stage is important. The rollout here has been slightly different in that social care has been the first wave. Second waves and third waves have now been introduced, and I think the model is now being spread across the partnership in a more positive way. So yes, I would not be worried about if I write in the report now.
And what we've been doing over this year is we've been doing, so last year we focused on the children's social care rollout of restorative practice. We have spent the second half of this year, last year, doing the single agency rollout for education and for health. And we are now, this month, we've started on our joint so that everybody kind of had their single agency understanding the basics around what is restorative practice. And we've now got a programme of 20 joint sessions that are running through January, February, March, where we come together as a multi-agency group to look at restorative practice in practice as a multi-agency group. What does that look like? And doing that training together. And so those places, I just might want to give an update, but those sessions dates have been set for February and people booked on, and we'll have done it by March.
Yeah, I'm Anne-Marie Kemp. I'm the interim business safeguarding partnership manager, so I can absolutely confirm that we have a training programme from January to March, and all those places are filled with about 160 places. So all of those are filled. Yeah, the rollout was with single agency before Christmas, but they are now offered to multi-agency partners.
Okay, thank you. So when in a year's time, we can feel assured that restorative practice, relational work, think family approach is going to be well embedded in the partnership. Okay, that's very assuring. Thank you. Councillor Proctor. Yep.
I can't quite get a sense of how many practitioners we expect to be trained versus how many have been trained. So can you give me a sense of how many practitioners actually would need to go through the training, and where are we in terms of a percentage of that?
It's different for different agencies. So in social care, it's all of our practitioners to go through it. In different agencies, for the police, it'll be just those police that are involved in key. It's about direct work with families. So for the police, it'll be just those kind of very frontline officers that are involved in the Section 47's work. For health, it may be a range of lead professionals. For schools, some schools have adopted the training for the school in restorative practice, but they've also identified leads, the DSLs and leads for the schools that can be involved in that training. So it is kind of a bit different for each different agency. But it's a programme that we all continue to run as workforce and people change. So we'll always have kind of a train the trainer kind of approach as we go forward. I don't know if the other agencies want to.
Yeah, happy to just note with health. So we've had single agency training before Christmas. We've got another 4 sessions next week and they're all fully booked as well. So we're moving towards that. And the multi-agency sessions have already been advertised as well. We need to book some more sessions for those that they are fully booked now. So within health, we are moving forward, and those are your health visitors, your school nurses, your midwives, those that are working directly with families, may have been involved previously with those early help processes, child protection processes, etc., strategy meetings.
I don't need to pursue this anymore. It's just, I guess, because I'm a numbers person, hearing that everything's booked up isn't the same as we've nearly trained everybody, or we're right at the start, or we're halfway through, and just that we don't need to go into that. But that's always, I think, often in the reports I see that we have numbers, but not the context of, is that a big number? Is that so? This is just a small example of.
Could I just possibly respond to that? I think it's just important that we note that at the end of March, when those training sessions are, I say concluded, they won't be concluded, we need to review with our partners what the need is for further training. We'll continue to discuss that with leads further, and as Tina alluded to, we have got colleagues within children's social care who are trained to deliver that training, so we'll continue to liaise with them to roll out any further training that's necessary. Of course, March will have a much better idea of how many partners or how many professionals do need that training still. So I think it's a review in a couple of months' time.
So I imagine by the time we get the report in October, actually we'll have a much better picture. Okay, I don't think there are any more questions, and I know that we need to look at our recommendations. I just want to thank you all very much for coming, and I have to say that the partnership looks so much more robust than it did when we met this time last year and prior to that as well. So it is great to see those improvements, and it's really good to see the dedication that people have to getting the partnership into good shape. So I'm thinking maybe we should just stop the live stream for a second while we work on the recommendations. Sorry, yes, Councillor Powell, sorry.
Sorry, Chair,
have
just
final
wanted to
word.
make just one quick point if I could. So I'm conscious that was a discussion with the Children's Safeguarding Partnership. So I've been talking to the Local Government Association quite recently, in fact repeatedly recently. The guidance for lead members, which include guidance on the interaction with what were old children's safeguarding boards, dates back to 2016. So it's acknowledged the guidance for lead members needs to be updated to reflect the changes in working together in particular. And I also sat silently because I'm cautious about blurring boundaries, but you will know I also do some safeguarding work elsewhere. So all of that conversation, the comments about potentially the confines of statutory case reviews and guidance aren't lost on me. And I'd already been having those conversations at both a regional and a national level before it was ever raised locally. So just to give some assurance that in the background, as well as all the other work that's been described, I'm conscious of that too.
Thank you. Right, shall we stop the live stream for a second while we just figure out Right, thank you. So we've come to our recommendations. Monitoring officer. Sorry, statutory scrutiny officer. Could you please read the recommendations out to us?
Thank you, Chair. The recommendations of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee on the 21st of January 2025, following its scrutiny of the Herefordshire Safeguarding Children Partnership Yearly Review of Effectiveness Report 2023 to 2024, are as follows. 1. The partnership ensures that the recommendations from the 2024-25 annual review of effectiveness onwards have an identified partnership lead and an indicative timeframe for completion. 2. The partnership appends an implementation plan for the recommendations in its 2024-25 annual review of effectiveness. And 3. Herefordshire Council's Director of Children's Services and Director of Governance and Law provide, I'll change that there, that S, if that's okay with you, guidance to elected members on their corporate parent responsibilities in the event of a significant incident or death concerning a care leaver under the age of 25. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we vote on block for those, please? Everybody in agreement? Okay, so that's agreed. Thank you. So item 9 on the agenda is the work programme, and the work programme as it currently stands has been printed. We will be asking you all to attend a meeting just to discuss the work programme, as we haven't actually had a meeting as a committee for a while about the work programme and any other items that you feel should be added to that work programme. So please look out for that in your diaries. And also, yes, Councillor Harvey.
Sorry, I was just going to say, can we note in the minutes the request that we try and schedule the annual review from the Safeguarding Partnership earlier in our get it into our work programme now, just so we've got it captured?
If that's okay with you, the committee, actually, I took the liberty of jotting this down into the September slot for your work programme going forward. Are you happy for me to do that, given that this would be the 16th September, so it would follow on from the September publication date, if you're in agreement with that? Yeah. And I'll circulate that around as part of the draft work programme, probably tomorrow, actually, around people for comment.
Thank you. And the other thing that's come up from that report that reminded me that the neglect strategy is something that we haven't actually